So nice to see you all. Thanks for coming out. And I work at Twilio as a technical marketing engineer that basically translates in my day-to-day to something like a developer evangelism role, developer relations. If you're interested in learning more about that type of work, I'm always happy to talk about that. But I'm here today to talk to you about evals, evaluations, and broadly how we think about using evals at Twilio in our own development of a product called Twilio AI Assistance, which I'll talk to you a little bit about later. But before I dive into that, if you've heard of Twilio as a developer, I think it's probably likely that if you've used Twilio or heard of us, you've heard of our communications APIs, right? Probably messaging, voice. And that's still a core part of Twilio's business. That's still our bread and butter, I would say. But Twilio does many things beyond that, in fact. And we are a customer engagement platform. That means any place that your business is talking to customers, Twilio has a platform and building blocks to help you as developers kind of build a better experience for your customer. And so given that kind of expertise and experience with communications, and the team that I work on, which is the emerging tech and innovation team at Twilio, we looked at those communications and we said, well, this seems like a right place to kind of think about conversational AI, right? And so in the last year, my team, which is focused primarily on research and thinking about the kind of 3 to 5 year time horizon of Twilio's product roadmap, we thought, well, let's see what happens if we apply conversational AI to this kind of customer engagement space. And as part of that, we started a program called Twilio Alpha, which is our channel for distributing and sharing our research with developers, with users to get feedback and kind of start the research process really early so that we can get your feedback to build better products 2 to 3 years down the line. As part of this program, Twilio Alpha, we made a bet and said, let's build a platform for creating AI agents that work with your conversational customer engagement strategy. And thus, Twilio AI Assistance was born. Turns out people really liked it. We had a lot of developers using it early, started building with it. It is now a product. You can try it today for free in the Twilio console. If you're already a Twilio user, it's there. If you're not, it's free to sign up. And I'll give you a quick demo later of what that looks like. But as we were building this product, as we're thinking about research, we're focused on a few key questions. And those questions are around the kind of impact of autonomous agents and AGI on the future of customer engagement, right? So we're curious, we're thinking about how will channels change? Today, as a consumer, you probably get texts, you get emails, maybe you get phone calls. What are the channels that we aren't thinking about yet, right? We're also thinking about what the role of personalization and data looks like in a world where we're maybe exclusively or mostly talking to AI, right? We're also interested as a developer forward company, as a company that's always cared about our developer community and specifically about APIs, which is how Twilio started. We're thinking about how APIs and the developer experience might change. So these are all the exciting questions I get to think about day to day. But today I want to focus in on a specific thing that has helped us a lot as we've been building AI assistants and as we've been thinking about AI in this space. So I'll start with a quick question. You don't have to, you can raise your hand if you want, but just think to yourself, if you went to college here in the US, did you take the SATs or maybe the ACT? And why? Imagine for a second, think about why you took that test. Probably because everybody took it and the universities required it, right? But fundamentally, SATs and other kind of standardized tests like this are meant to provide a shared framework for assessing something that's not that straightforward, right? Human intelligence is very nuanced, very hard to measure. But we need to have a shared language for how we evaluate it and how we talk about it. So the way that looks for a college student or a pre-college student is that we combine standardized testing with other evaluation mechanisms like the essays maybe you wrote, right? And the interviews you did with people to try and put together and paint a full picture of human intelligence. And there's a similar need for LLMs and LLM-based systems. As we're building these complex, nuanced systems, we need a way to evaluate and talk about how good they are at doing whatever they're doing. And these frameworks are called Evals, so short for evaluations. Today, I want to spend some time talking about what evals are for those of you who maybe haven't thought about this yet or haven't encountered these. And we'll go through that. We'll talk about some things that we've learned building evals into or as we build our product, how we use evals and how they've helped us, and how you might think about applying them if you're doing LLM development or if you're building agentic systems on top of LLMs. And then at the end, I'll do a quick demo of Twilio AI Assistance so you can see what we're building and also show you how we're kind of testing it today. So what are evals? I also think I noticed there's another evaluation talk at the end tonight. So hopefully you'll get kind of a nice primer right now, and then later a deeper dive and maybe some other tooling you can use. So I think I just covered this. What are evals? They're a shared way to talk about model intelligence or model performance. And why might we do them? Well, I guess I have a more official definition here. Evals are systematic methods for assessing the performance and capabilities of LLM. So straightforwardly, it's a way to say, is this doing what I want it to do? And why might you do it? There's a few different reasons. I think if you're, I come from a background in product engineering, web development, so I'm familiar with test-driven development, right? I think this is an interesting framework to apply on top of evals when you're thinking about LLM development. So one reason you might do that is non-regression testing, if you're building, adding things. And I'll talk tonight, you'll hear me talking both about evals can be applied at the kind of model level, right? If you're training a model or working at that fundamental level, can also be applied if you're building on top of an LLM, and maybe you're not training the model, but you're kind of building an agentic or a system on top of a model. So we'll talk about both of those. So in the non-regression case, that might mean, is my model training well, or is the system that I'm building on top of it consistent, right? The second reason you might use evals is for leaderboards, which are exactly what they sound like. Which model is best at a specific task or a specific set of criteria? There's some good leaderboards out there. You may have seen things like the ELO system, right? There's different ways to test models and to evaluate them against each other. Capability is another reason, or suitability, which answers the question, can my model do X, right? Or can my system do X? Is it suitable for this specific type of task? And then the final reason, and I think this is an important one, and this has been what's most important for us at Twilio as we're building a system on top of LLMs, can I iterate quickly and confidently while building? I think at the end of the day, that's the most important thing we as developers get out of testing, is the ability to move fast and make changes. And at Twilio specifically, I'll tell you a little bit about how and why we use evals. We use them to reduce the risk of introducing regressions, like I mentioned, non-regression testing, in overall quality of the product that we're building. We're also looking for broken functionality in the end-to-end experience. We have users using the product. We obviously don't want to impact them if we're changing things. We are building on top of models. We are not training our own models, but this helps us, gives us a framework for comparing performance of new models or new constellations of models against what we're using today so that we can kind of introduce those changes quickly. And then we also use evals to verify our security and safety mechanisms. So if you're doing something like testing for prompt injection or other like red teaming types of things where you're trying to test the security of your system or models, it's another great way to do that. And then we're also using evals to compare ourselves against the industry. This is another kind of leaderboard, right? We can keep track of how we're doing against similar products or similar systems. All right, that's what are evals and why you might use them. I want to talk about a couple of different types. This is a really broad term still, right? This is a broad category of testing. It essentially just means evaluating a model or a system. But what are the specific types of evals that you might encounter or might want to use? The first is automated benchmarks. And automated benchmarks are standard tests, a standard set of tests that measure an LLM or an LLM-based system on specific tasks. So this is really well suited for something like you want to know how well your model performs at a specific task. And a task in this context means something that's well-defined and concrete. So that might be something like classifying spam emails, right? You can look at an email and you can say, is this spam, yes or no? That's the task, and it's a very discrete task. So that is an example of something that automated benchmarks might do well. And the way you do that is you give your model a sample of spam and non-spam emails, right? And you give them a metric, which is 0 is like misclassified and 1 is classified correctly. And then you evaluate your model against those samples. Pretty straightforward. You say, are you doing this task well? The downsides here are the sort of cons to automated benchmarks. So it's not as powerful for evaluating general capability. That's something more like, is my model good at math? That's a pretty broad question and hard to categorize into specific tasks. So this won't help you as much with that question. And it can also be problematic if your evaluations end up in a training data set. So if your model is trained on a set of data that includes the tests you're running on it, that's called contamination. And essentially, your model will perform really well on the benchmarks because it's like, hey, I know the answers to this. But it won't generalize well. It won't apply those skills to other tasks that it hasn't seen before. That's also, you may have heard of overfitting, which is when a model can kind of only predict really well on its training data. So there's just some downsides to automated benchmarking, but again, it's like a pretty standard set of tests to determine if your model's good at a specific thing. The second type of evaluations we'll talk about are human evaluations. This is what it sounds like. Humans assess LLM outputs, right? You may have heard the very scientific term vibes check. I love that this is the thing. This is, does this feel right? Does this seem like the right answer? You can do this using community feedback for like a massive model ranking. You can throw it out to what's called an arena, a large group of people, kind of crowdsource responses. The downside there is there's high subjectivity. It's hard to get Reddit to follow rules, right? Or whatever, to get a big group of people to do things in a very specific way. There's a thing called wisdom of the crowd, which is like, it's a mathematical thing. It's not my area of expertise, but if you ask a bunch of people a question, I think the like sort of bell curve will hover around the answer, so that can offset some of this. So vibes check, that's like, does this feel right? You can ask a bunch of people. Another way to do human evaluation is to do systematic annotations. This is where you're giving humans who maybe you're paying a like very specific set of criteria on which to judge the output. This generally returns slightly better results. You're providing them very rigorous guidelines, but bias still exists. We're still humans at the end of the day. Using humans as judges does offset that problem where general kind of more complex or nuanced problems are hard to measure. So more complex topics are a little easier to answer with this, like, is my model good at math? Or maybe, is my model good at poetry, right? That's a very human question. But it does correlate well with human preference, which sometimes is what we're trying to train the models to do, right? So if you are trying to train a model to do something that humans will like, this may be a good eval method for you. If you're trying to do something where you're training your model to do something that is right or wrong or has a very specific set of guidelines, this may not be the best choice. This can also be expensive, obviously, and it can reinforce or embed biases into that model evaluation. So some important things to consider. And the last thing we'll talk about is LLMs as judges. So if we take the humans out and put it in LLM as the thing evaluating the output, that's our last sort of option here. And for when you're thinking about using LLMs as judges, I think it's valuable to think about using, you have to decide whether you're going to use a more general model or if you're going to use a very smaller specialized model that's specifically trained in whatever task you're trying to evaluate. It's less expensive, but this does kind of tend to act a little unpredictably and doesn't always correlate well with human preference. So again, if you are using an LLM as a judge and it has terrible taste in poetry, you're probably not going to get a great poetry model. These are 3 broad categories of types of evaluations to consider if you're thinking about how do I test my LLM or my model, or how do I test my kind of LLM-based system. All right. That's the high level. I want to dive in a little and look at some ways you can actually implement right now. Tomorrow you can go to work or wherever, you can actually start adding some evals to your system or to your model process. And we will go through kind of level 1, 2, and 3, which is the easiest, fastest to kind of hardest, most expensive ways to implement some evals. And I'll tell you along the way kind of how at Twilio we've implemented these things or where we're using these processes. Also, note this graphic, this image, is pulled from Hamel Hussein's blog, a blog post about evals. I think it's called Why Your LLM System Needs Evals. It's linked in my resources slide. I must give credit where credit is due. He has some excellent content on evals and broadly testing. Recommend checking it out. And much of this is borrowed from him. All right. So, level 1 of adding evaluations to your system is unit tests. Just like, again, if we're coming back to test-driven development or to application testing, same concept. Unit tests, I'll go through 1, 2, and 3, and then we'll, come back and talk about each one. The second level to add evaluations at is model and human evaluation. So like we were talking about, kind of those second pieces where you're using a judge, whether a human or another LLM, to evaluate the output of your responses. And then finally, the third level of evaluations for a more mature kind of complex system down the line when you have a product and you have people using it is A/B testing, good old A/B testing. Because at the end of the day, understanding how your users react to a change gives you a ton of information. So let's jump back and think about unit tests. What are unit tests in the context of LLM evaluation or model evaluation? They are, I think, the same thing you might expect if you've done unit testing on code before. It's just a little less programmatic. Unit tests are things that will run fast and cheap, and you should run them on every change. This means if you're training your model and you're making changes in that way, you want to run your unit tests to, again, kind of determine non-regression and make sure that you're not introducing breaking changes. If you're making changes to your prompting or to your system that surrounds your LLM, these should also run on every change. And they should be fast to do for that reason. A good way to think about this is to break down what you're testing into features and scenarios, kind of small scoped tasks, again, like small yes or no answer questions. And use that as the basis for what your unit test suite looks like. And you can use an LLM to generate your test cases. Don't be afraid to do so. If you have a very clear outline for what your test cases should look like, and you just need a ton of them, that's a good way to do it. And I think the best thing to do here is to set your bar, which this is important. Your bar doesn't have to be 100%, right? I think this is a difference between testing code and testing a model or testing an LLM. In code, generally, we want everything to work exactly as expected because it is programmatic, it's deterministic. For an LLM system, it may be that if it works 90% of the time, that's decent. That's good enough for you, right? Because it is non-deterministic, it's going to change every time. It's up to you where that bar lies and up to your sort of tolerances for your users and your product. But when you decide what that bar is, you should set it, you should run those tests, evaluate, and then you can either change your tests if your bar is maybe too high or too low, or you can you can know that you've broken something or changed something in a way that does not support your bar. All right, that's unit testing. The second type of testing, so that's the easiest, cheapest to add, right? Next is model and human evaluation. And I'll talk at the end about the frameworks that we're using to do this. So I forgot, at Twilio, we are doing unit testing. Today, we use an open source framework called PromptFoo, which I'll show you an example of later. But there's lots of good tools out there for doing this. And I have some resources in my that I'll share at the end as well. All right. The second type of evaluation you might add is that model and human evaluation. Again, this is a little more expensive, so this is something you want to consider when the stakes are a little higher. If you're really early in development, it may not make sense to start doing this early on. Some important things to think about as you're starting to think about adding model and human evaluation is that you need, if you want somebody or something to look at your output, you have to log it somewhere. So ensure that you're logging your traces so that your human or model can actually evaluate those, right? Log your conversations. And you can start by letting humans grade them. In order to do that, you need to decrease the friction for looking at data. So make your traces easy to look at, easy to find. There are tools for doing this. You could build something yourself, but that's an important piece. And then introducing an evaluator model allows you to automate some of that testing, right? Again, humans' time is obviously expensive. If you introduce an evaluating model, you can automate some of that testing. And then it's important you can track the correlation. So if your human is always doing one thing and your model is always doing another, there's a misalignment, right? And you're not going to get good results out of that. So decide how much you can rely on that automatic evaluation or modify your LLM-based evaluation to more closely correlate with your human evaluation. Yep. All right. That's 1, 2, 3. And the final piece, which is for more mature products, I would say, because it's more expensive, it relies on a user base, is starting to run A/B tests and experiment on LLM output. This is classic scientific method, right? Start with a problem statement, hypothesize, bucket your users, segment your users into groups, and run experiments. For example, by introducing X, we expect to observe an increase or decrease in Y. This is a great way to really get real user feedback, right? Even unbiased, because they're doing it without telling you the feedback. And so you can kind of see what levers you have to impact your user experience. And today at Twilio, keep forgetting this piece, we are doing some model and human evaluation. And I'll show you what that looks like in our testing framework. We are not doing A/B testing today on our AI Assistance product. We're still a burgeoning product, small user base. So one day I hope to, but we're not doing that yet. If you are, I'm interested to hear about it. All right. As you're introducing evals, I think some things to strive for can be helpful. Some general concepts to keep in mind to what to work towards as you start to introduce evaluations. The first is diverse metrics. So we talked about a bunch of different types of evals to run. You should do as many of them as you reasonably can. And this gives you a full picture of how your model or how your system is performing against that user feedback and against a model's evaluation as well. Second, contextual relevance is really important. You want to make sure that you're actually testing for things that you want to happen, right? Tests are not valuable if they're testing for scenarios that you don't actually care about or might not actually happen in the real world. So ensure that you're thinking about contextual relevance. This is the same as with, I think, application development. And then finally, transparency and ease of use. At the end of the day, we are still building for humans mostly, so it's important that humans can use your system. So whatever you choose to use to build evals or to write your own evals, make sure that they're easy to access, easy to understand, well documented. That's just my evergreen development advice. Cool. Okay, that is my big picture. Emily's thoughts, taken again from many sources, all of whom I appreciate and who I've linked in my resources slide so that you can read more about evals. I want to take a moment and dive into a quick demo of Twilio AI Assistance so that you can see what that product looks like and what we're building. And then I'll show you our testing framework, again, which is built on top of an open source tool called PromptFoo. Their team is great. We've had a great time working with them. There's tons of good eval frameworks out there and more coming every day. So Twilio AI Assistance, like I mentioned, we are a customer engagement platform at Twilio. So we think a lot about how businesses engage with customers. AI Assistance is an opinionated framework for building and hosting AI agents specifically for customer-facing use cases. So this is where we're kind of living, is thinking about what are the specific problems and the specific cases that you might run into if you're trying to deploy AI agents to customers as a business. AI assistance, if you've worked with kind of AI agent platforms at all, these things will not be unfamiliar to you. But our tool solves problems autonomously with tools and knowledge. So we have the ability for you to add API interfaces for your agent to call, as well as to upload knowledge. We do the kind of RAG pipeline on our end so that you don't have to worry about data management. We also allow you to use your existing customer data. You may have heard of Twilio Segment, which is a customer data platform where you are able to collect and clean and aggregate data from across all your interactions with your users, whether that's on your website or your mobile app or marketing emails. And that Segment CDP becomes a really rich set of customer data. And so your AI assistants can actually leverage that customer data to personalize interactions with the user. And then finally, AI assistants, because we're Twilio, engages with your customers how they prefer. Our assistants are omni-channel, which means they work on SMS, WhatsApp, voice, email, all of the channels you can think of today that you can already build with Twilio. So that's AI assistance. We're going to dive in and see it, which will take me just a moment. Hopefully I'm logged in. All right. If you have played with Twilio before or built with Twilio before, you'll be hopefully maybe familiar with this console. This is the Twilio console. AI Assistance is, again, available to anybody from the console. You'll have to search for it if you've never used it before. And you get 100 messages per month free. So that's kind of the development budget so that you can start to play and iterate and build an assistant without getting charged, obviously. And then after that, there's some pricing, which you can take a look at. If you're looking to build for a production use case, our team is always happy to talk to you. Again, we're still pretty early in the product life cycle of this product, so we are here to hold your hand if you want us to. I'm going to jump over and we're going to look at an assistant I built called Schubert, which is a retail example. So let's say I am the owner of a friendly shoe store and I wanted to introduce an AI agent onto my retail website and maybe also across channels so that my customers could text or email or go to my website and talk to my AI agent about what type of shoes they should buy. So Schubert is just a fun pun. That's the inspiration for this whole thing. We use a concept called AI constellations. Again, I mentioned we're not training our own models. We are building on top of existing models. We think that our expertise, there are many very smart people doing great model work. We think that our expertise is sort of taking and using those models. But the constellation concept allows us to potentially build together multiple models that can call out to each other, that are orchestrated under the hood to solve for specific use cases or tasks. So we're going to use just the standard one. I have a little personality prompt here. This is kind of your basic prompt engineering space where I'm telling my assistant who it is and broadly what its voice should kind of be, what personality it should take, and then maybe some very specific rules. You'll see here I'm giving it some clear guidance on how to interact with customers. Customer memory is that piece where your agent, your assistant can actually integrate with Twilio Segment. And so customer memory allows you to do two things. It can pull data from Segment, which is things you already know about your customer. So it can it can welcome them by name, let's say, talk to them about their interests, things that it already knows. And the AI perception engine allows your assistant, as it's having that conversation with your customer, to actually infer relevant data about the customer and save it back to the Segment profile. So in the shoe case, for example, if I'm a customer and I'm on the website and I'm talking to Schubert, the AI agent, and I say, I'm running a marathon next year, I'm a big marathon runner. That's relevant to a shoe store, right? The shoe store might want to know that I'll be buying a lot of running shoes in the next year. So my AI agent will infer that that's an important detail, save it back to my customer profile. I'm going to speed up. I think I'm not missed when we started, but I think I am almost at time. So I'm going to move quickly through the rest of this so I can show you the Eval platform, and then we'll have maybe a minute for questions. Like I mentioned, we have the ability for you to build tools into your AI assistant. Tools are similar to webhooks, designed to give your assistant the ability to take action or perform tasks. So I have a couple pre-built ones here. My assistant can place an order by making a call out to an order management system, can fetch an order, it can do a discount code, things like this. The description describes when and how my assistant should use this tool. This is all passed to the underlying model as part of the prompt and context. And so these are kind of some interesting places to play. I definitely recommend getting in and just trying it out. You also define what the input schema to that endpoint should look like, and the assistant infers, based on the conversation, how to fill that in or what information to ask for on top of that. That's tools. Knowledge, I mentioned. You can upload documents, you can provide websites, things like this. You don't have to think about chunking and embedding and managing a RAG pipeline. We do that on the back end, and it makes knowledge management a little bit easier, I think. And then channels, as I mentioned, you can deploy your assistant to multiple channels, including messaging, and as of tomorrow, voice, which is exciting. All right. With that, I'm going to, just for the sake of time, I will not dive into the simulator and we won't get into a whole conversation. Simulator is the way for you as a developer to kind of test from the UI, test with your assistant, and it allows you to see what the assistant is doing, what tools it's using, and how it's kind of interacting under the hood. All right, but before we do, or instead of doing that, I want to show you what an example of this is a prompt foo config file. We provide a package that has some helper methods for sort of testing your Twilio AI Assistance specifically. And so I'm building with that here. And this is an example. It's YAML. It's not that pretty to look at or fun to read, but it is the way that I am defining my tests, my evals. So I have a few unit tests here, which I've called out. And essentially, you define the prompt. In this case, I'm saying, ahoy, I just want to see what happens when I say hi to my agent. And I expect that my agent should respond with a greeting. So you're able to test here on like deterministic values rather than saying, does the agent say hi back? I'm just saying, I expect my response to have one of these three values. So this is a good example of like a fast, quick, deterministic unit test. And then we also have some helper methods for testing tools and knowledge. So for example, here I am testing that this tool, we'll look at this one, that it used a tool. So for example, if I say to my agent, I want these high heels in a size 6 and I'd like them in red. Here's my shipping address. I give it all the details that it needs. I expect it to use that place order tool. So this is probably, it is still a unit test because I'm testing like a specific piece of functionality, but it's a little more complex than that kind of deterministic hi, hello. And then we also provide some convenience methods for running tests that use an LLM as a judge. So again, when we talked about that model and human evaluation, this is a way that you can do some model evaluation. And that's the LLM rubric type here. And so essentially the prompt is what's going to to our AI assistant, to the Twilio AI assistant. And then the assertion, the value of the assertion is to the testing model, the judge. And I'm saying to that judge model, does this response indicate that you can return a pair of shoes within 30 days of purchase? And my model will decide whether it does or doesn't. We can just run these and see what happens as our grand finale. And while they're running, I will tell you how you can. We'll check back on that in just a second. What to do next. So if you scan this QR code, it should take you to a Google Doc that has a list of links to these slides, some other eval frameworks, prompt foo, and it's also, there's a way to click through and start building with AI assistance today. I'm always happy to hear from you. There's also a way to connect with me. Fortunately, I have to jump out right after I get off stage today, but please reach out with your thoughts, questions, what you're building. I love to hear about what people are building. Let's check on those tests and see how it went, if they're done. Hey, 5 successes, 0 failures. And you can see again with prompt foo, which is the platform we're using here, or the tool, it sort of lays out the prompt, the run ID, which is just like which run was it, session, if I indicated a session ID, and then the pass, which is the response from the agent that it's either evaluating or that it is evaluating. That is my time. I think maybe we have a couple minutes for questions. Thank you so much for being here and for coming out and for learning together. Again, please connect with me. Always happy to hear about what you're building. Today, the way we build our AI constellations is all done in-house. We're not using any specific tools. And in fact, it's still a pretty simple problem because we haven't branched out into more complex constellations yet. So all our constellations today all are based primarily on GPT-4o. We're still using singular model constellations for today. But we recently are doing things like we've just made a big improvement to a new constellation, which is specific for use cases where you have a lot of knowledge. And the way that we're doing that is essentially we're building some prompting around that underlying model that instead of doing a lookup on your knowledge based on the prompt, whatever question the user has asked it, it actually does a pre-index. It like checks into each knowledge source before the user's question comes in and understands what's in each knowledge source. So it's more useful if you have very nuanced knowledge sources where it's like maybe they're dependent on different locations and you want your kind of prompting model to have a sense of what's in each of those knowledge sources before before the user even asks the question. So that's kind of one example of a way that we're using constellations to improve our strategies. But to your question about orchestration, today it's not super complex yet. But if you connect with me, I'm always happy to talk more about it, and I'll keep you posted if we launch any new constellations that are doing more interesting orchestration under the hood. I personally have not grappled with this too much yet, but I know that the team has. And I think one learning that they ran into was specifically for hallucinations. I think the best way to get around that is to do unit testing that's very deterministic. So, for example, you need to understand that there is or is not a specific piece of information in the output. So you're not judging the quality of the output. You're literally judging yes or no, binary. Is there the right data in this response? So that's kind of the most useful way to evaluate whether something is hallucinating. So that falls into the unit testing category. I would say it's more deterministic. And then human testing, of course, is at the end of the day the best way. Model evaluation, I've found, and I think I've heard from the team, is not always that useful for hallucination control, because you're kind of prone. You're adding another layer of potential hallucination, right? And Twilio's stance as our team, the emerging tech and innovation team, is that hallucinations are not entirely preventable, and that you need to build for a world where you're prepared to deal with them. And so I think evals are a really good way to kind of do that, to build in some non-regression testing to make sure that you're determining whether the information that you want is actually in the output. That was a lot of words to say. I don't think we've found the right answer yet, but it's a really interesting problem. And I think human evaluation at the end of the day is still the best way. I think that type of test is valuable to run every time you make a change. Oh, yes. Yeah. And that's where deciding what your bar is. So yes, if you're running the same test 100 times, or X number of times, decide you may see hallucinations some percentage of that time, and deciding where that bar is. But yes, definitely, running the same test multiple times can actually be useful in a non-deterministic world. Yeah.